We never really took the time to wonder about the level of destruction to people's lives, to their livelihoods. People's lives that were simply obliterated in a matter of seconds, destroyed in the wake of what we used to always hear about, the sorties, as they were known. Sorties, bombing raids, in other words. All we got to see were these cockpit screen images and videos of missiles hitting those faraway targets, and then a large plume of smoke. Black and white, sanitized warfare, you could argue. In Ukraine, we see the sheer magnitude of destruction of the past 2 weeks. So what has changed? To many of the realists among us here in this hall and far beyond, you might say, not very much, sadly. History is a long succession of brutal wars, wars that pit humans against fellow humans. Ukraine stands out, though, also because we have for the first time an open military conflict that could bring about not just another world war, but for the first time a nuclear world war. For now, what is terrifying beyond the destructive force of the bombs that are raining in and around cities and villages in Ukraine is that we cannot be for sure, can we, that nuclear weapon states will reason, that deterrence will continue to work for another day. We cannot be sure, can we, that a computer glitch won't happen, that there won't be some form of cyber attack that could trigger the unthinkable, that an accident at a nuclear reactor couldn't happen overnight. Before we begin our discussion, allow me to quote from an interview that was broadcast on May 12, 1996 on 60 Minutes, which many of you will know, a highly regarded US news program in the United States. Leslie Stahl, the journalist, on US sanctions against Iraq. We have heard that 500,000 children have died. I mean, that's more children than died in Hiroshima. And you know, is the price worth it? Secretary of State Madeleine Albright. I think this is a very hard choice, but the price, we think the price is worth it. We think the price is worth it. So in the midst of this latest human tragedy, as we debate the price of peace or cost of war, it is worth asking our panelists and ourselves, what price should we be willing to pay? And what is your price? Is it worth the sacrifice? Now, we were supposed to have with us on this panel President Zelensky of Ukraine, but at the last minute, for obvious reasons, he was not able to join us. But we're very, very honored to have with us the Prime Minister of Ukraine, Denis Shmyhal, as well as the Secretary General of NATO, the Presidents of Slovenia and Niger. So let me go straight to you, Prime Minister Shmyhal, in Kiev. It's obviously good to have you in these very difficult and challenging times that your country and your people are going through. When we recall the comments that were made early on in late January by President Zelensky, when he was talking down any imminent threat of an invasion, telling Western and nations and the United States not to create panic, quote unquote. And then less than a month later, on the 24th of February, Russia began what it called its special military operation. It is now day 16. Ukraine and Russia are at war. What will it take to end this conflict? To what extent is Russia willing to sit down at the negotiating table at the highest level? I know there were meetings yesterday here in Antalya between the foreign ministers, but to what extent do you believe that unless a negotiated diplomatic settlement is found rather soon, this conflict could go on for weeks, months, potentially even years, leaving more destruction and more people fleeing for their lives?
The participation of representatives of Ukraine in this important forum designed to give a new impetus to diplomacy for solving problems of nowadays must be completely different. 2 weeks ago, we were working on preparing a visit of Ukrainian delegation led by President Volodymyr Zelensky to Antalya, and during this visit, we're supposed to share Ukraine's experience in diplomacy and its vision of how it should be straightened. In the morning of 24th February of 2022, the world changed, and not only for Ukraine. Russia insidiously attacked peaceful Ukraine, its people and infrastructure from the air and from the ground. It attacked Ukraine from its own territory and from the territory of its client state, Belarus. Only a few days before that, both President of Russian Federation and President of Belarus had sworn to the whole world that they would never attack Ukraine. This is my first signal. One shouldn't believe whatever the leadership of Russia and Belarus say. The Russian leadership wanted to conduct so-called blitzkrieg in Ukraine and capture our country in 3 days. They even prepared a ceremonial uniform to celebrate the victory, but the plans of invaders were disrupted. Their victory has not come true and will never come true. All Ukrainians, as one, rose to defend their country. The courageous armed forces of Ukraine have been resisting with dignity and resolve for 16 days already, inflicting irreparable losses on the Russian invaders. In just a few days, more than 100 Ukrainians have joined the ranks of territorial defense units to assist the regular troops. 215,000 Ukrainians have returned back home from abroad to defend their motherland. Every Ukrainian city, large and small, has become a fortress. People work day and night to do everything possible to strengthen the city defenses so that the Russian occupiers do not invade them and ruin their lives. Here is my second message. What is going on in Ukraine is the liberation war of Ukrainians against the Russian invasion. In Ukraine, no one is waiting for Russians with flowers. Nobody wants to recruit of USSR in Ukraine. Ukrainians want to be left alone so that they can build their own state and choose the future for themselves and their children. We often hear from here and there that Russia has no legitimate security concerns and attacked Ukraine as it left threatened by NATO and the US, which are allegedly behind Ukraine. This is a pure piece of Russian propaganda. Foreign Minister Lavrov, by promoting its propaganda message, Moscow desperately tries to reconstruct the realities of the Cold War and artificially declare itself one of the two superpowers, which is not. Moreover, no NATO or US could treat the national uprising of Ukrainians, which we observed during the Maidan revolution, during Russia's initial attack on Ukraine, Crimea, and Donbass in 2014, and during the ongoing full-scale war against all Ukraine. In reality, Russian leadership with Putin on top of it hates Ukraine, wants to steal its history, absorb its territories, and despite its people of nationhood. Putin promotes a crazy narrative that Ukraine was artificially created in 20th century. Also, our nationhood is more than a millennium old. Moreover, Ukraine is founding member of the United Nations, whose existence and borders were recognized not only by all international community, but also by Russia itself through a number of bilateral documents, as well as notorious Budapest Memorandum. Here goes my third message. Ukraine is a subject which requires support from other members of the international community, including NATO, EU, US, and Turkey, but is not guided or directed by any of them. Saying so, often hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians of Ukrainian servicemen and women, as well as millions of civilian Ukrainians who choose to fight the Russian aggression, but not to give up their independence. As I said, Russia has failed to invade Ukraine within days. That's why it has changed the tactics, and it's currently terrorizing Ukrainian civilians throughout the country. Not a single day passes without Russian showering Ukrainian cities, residential areas, and critical infrastructures with ballistic and cruise missiles, air and cluster bombs, which are prohibited by the Geneva Convention and other international documents. They have not been able to take control of any single big city. Therefore, they have thrown all their helpless wrath against small towns and communities. In the 21st century, we observe medieval siege of a number of municipalities. The Russians, who have been always boasting of their officers' honor, are fighting now with children and elderly, pregnant women and newly born. 2 days ago, the whole world frozen with terrible images of a cruel airstrike on a maternity hospital in Mariupol. This town has lost over 1,200 residents in just a few days of carpet bombing by Russians, and cannot bury them in a civilized manner because bombardments never stop. And I cannot stop feeling shocked with Russian officials who cynically justify these war crimes with lies and propaganda. Just yesterday, Minister Lavrov claimed that, I quote, a Ukrainian Nazi battalion established a base in the state hospital, having kicked out pregnant women and new moms. This is nonsense and lies. No Nazi was found in the debris. Yet the whole world saw videos and photos of killed and wounded women, destroyed maternity wards with blood everywhere. In general, Russians invented this fake narrative of Nazis in Ukraine to justify its own neo-Nazist policies. They always claim, and there are Nazis in Ukraine. Who are these Nazis? We even do not ultranationalists present in the political life of our country. Ukraine is a multinational country with over 100 nationalities living for centuries in peace and harmony. In fact, Russians call every patriot of Ukraine, for those who simply love their country, a Nazi. By this logic, they could call every patriot of our country in the world a Nazi and use this as a pretext to invade. Coming back to the humanitarian crisis that Russia is evoking in Ukraine now, they use civilians as hostages, trying to force the Ukrainian government to surrender. That's why for 5 days in a row, our every initiative to establish humanitarian corridors to and from besieged towns, including Mariupol, fails. We cannot bring supplies of food and medicine to these towns. We cannot evacuate hundreds of thousands of people, including foreigners, from this hell. Instead of cooperating of establishing humanitarian corridors, Russia used designated humanitarian roads to grab control of these towns. Yesterday, Russian Minister Lavrov came to Antalya with no mandate and intent to break through the blockade. This is shame. I can't help mentioning a terrible danger that is posed by Russia's capture of 2 Ukrainian nuclear power plants in Chernobyl and Zaporizhzhia. They took personal hostages. Normal functioning of the plants is interrupted. They are disconnected from the IAEA monitoring systems. The Chernobyl power plant is cut off regular electricity supply. This affects critical cooling system, which prevents the nuclear core of the plant from meltdown. And again, while they're performing these acts of nuclear terrorism, Russia spread a lie that Ukraine has nuclear weapons and intends to use it. The same can be said about recent ungrounded allegations that Ukraine has national or American labs of chemical and biological weapons. This is not true. At the same time, we have learned another thing. If Russia blames you of something, it means that it is meticulously planning to do this very thing. With all this said, it is critical that the world unites its effort to stop Russian aggression and as well as humanitarian and man-made catastrophes that is invoking. It is time for absolute unity. It is time to understand that every deviation from common efforts contributes to extending suffering of Ukrainian people. It is time to understand that every inaction means complicity to the aggression. This may shoot harsh, but this is the truth. In this regard, I call all leaders that are now listening to me and to exercise utmost political will and utmost human responsibility to take all measures to stop atrocities now. Help Ukrainians defend their skies from indiscriminate bombardment of innocent civilians. Or armed forces will do the rest.
Prime Minister Shmyhal,
Urge Russia with all to force stop a humanitarian crisis. 3 seconds. Make it clear to Kremlin and all those who participate, support or promote its aggressive policies that they will have no place to go, no place to hide, no place to trade with. If they do tomorrow or day after tomorrow, your country can get under attack too. The future depends on all of you and all of us. Thank you so much. Sorry for so long speech, but it's very important for all of us. Thank you.
Prime Minister Shmyhal, thank you very much for this. And allow me a quick follow-up or two, because I'm not sure how long you can stay with us. So going straight to the third point you made, your third message, in which you say that Ukraine requires the support from NATO member states and others. Are you still banking on the support from NATO? You have asked time and again for more weapons. You've asked for a no-fly zone. That obviously isn't happening anytime soon. Have you miscalculated the support, the pledges made by NATO, by the US in particular, by the West in general? Do you accept that they will not come to your rescue? Or are you still banking on it? Are you still asking for a no-fly zone? And are you willing to enter into a genuine diplomatic negotiation process with the Russians? What are your red lines?
Absolutely. We feel support all of the world. Absolutely. We know that our partners and our friends support us on any front. They supply us new technologies. They support us on the diplomatic and political way. They support us in humanitarian basis. So thanks to all of the partners for this great support, because world now, civilized world now is absolutely united in supporting of our country. We feel it, and we promise to all the civilized world that we will never give up, and we will fight for our country, for democracy, for freedom in the civilized world till the end. We have so great encourage of Ukrainian people to protect our country from this invasion, from this, I don't know, terrible invasion, terrible terrorism from Russia's side. And we really need more guns. I told you that we need closed sky by NATO, by our partners, because it will save our civilians, which are under carpet bombers in our city. And this is civilians who are not waiting this bombing, who are not waiting this cruise missiles and strategic missiles. So
but do you accept the NATO argument, though, that by enforcing a no-fly zone, this could lead to a much bigger war, that this would lead to serious security challenges, not just for your country, but for the rest of Europe and the rest of the world. Is it a price worth paying?
It's a question which is, I think, more for discussion, will it or not. But for now, Ukrainian children and women need to protect them. And Ukrainian army could do it, but we really need, in this case, we really need support of our partners in any way. So we may protect our country, we may fight against this aggression, but without support of the civilized world, I think that it's too hard. But we will do it in any way. We have no other way. We will protect our independence, we will protect our sovereignty, and we will protect our people. We will protect Ukrainians, and absolutely, we will protect Europeans.
Just yes or no, Prime Minister, before I move on to the NATO Secretary General, are you willing to sit down at the negotiating table and have on the agenda with the Russian Federation of Russia neutrality, Crimea, and the Donbass?
We absolutely understand that every war is finished on the table of negotiations, on the table of diplomatic decisions. So because of this, yesterday it was a real try from our side to have very concrete negotiations with Minister Lavrov, but as you all have seen, it's do not lead us to no results. So we will continue this effort, this diplomatic effort. We will ask our partners to support this effort, to help us to go to the diplomatic and to the political decision to stop war, to stop aggression.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister Šmihal. Thank you in case you have to leave us, but if you can stay with us, we'd be honored to have you. But I think I speak on behalf of everyone here in this hall and beyond when I say that
I will leave you if you let me.
We all hope and pray for a peaceful resolution in Ukraine.
Thank you so much.
Secretary General Stoltenberg, you're used to dealing with these sort of thorny issues ever since you took over as Secretary General of NATO in 2014, certainly tensions with former Soviet republics from that point onwards. You heard the Prime Minister's repeated pleas. They want more help. They don't just want words of support. Is NATO able and willing to offer them concrete help?
Yes, absolutely. And NATO and NATO allies are providing a concrete support. First of all, we have supported them for many years since 2014 with equipment, but not least many allies have trained tens of thousands of Ukrainian forces. And this proves extremely important now because many of these troops are now on the front line fighting the invading Russian forces. It's of course first and foremost the courage of the Ukrainian armed forces, the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian leadership that has stopped and slowed down the Russian invasion, but the support that NATO allies have provided with training and equipment since 2014 has proven to be extremely important in support of those efforts. Second, we have stepped up, so NATO allies are now providing more support, both military support, humanitarian support, and fiscal support or financial support. And then, of course, we are imposing unprecedented sanctions on Russia. And all of this is actually crippling the Russian economy. So the combination of concrete support and sanctions on Russia puts heavy pressure on President Putin and increases the reasons he will have to at some stage sit down and engage in good faith in diplomatic efforts. So yes, of course, NATO allies.
Do you really believe that these sanctions, though, will have that sort of impact, that they will compel President Putin to send back his troops in a week, in 2, or even 3, that these political pressures will go anywhere besides inflicting that economic cost, not just on the people of Ukraine, but on people around the world? Look at the rise in energy prices and the price of wheat around the world.
No one wants these sanctions. Of course, these sanctions are costly for the whole world, including for those countries which are imposing the sanctions. But at the same time, we have to react when we see Russia is blatantly violating international law, invading in a brutal way an independent sovereign country, Ukraine, and 140 nations at the UN condemned that strongly. NATO and NATO allies have imposed severe sanctions to put maximum pressure on Russia, and that increased the likelihood for them at some stage accepting that they have to sit down at the negotiating table. I agree with the Prime Minister that every war has to end at the negotiating table. The question is, how long do we have to wait for that? And therefore we put pressure on Russia, both by the sanctions, but also by providing support to Ukraine. They are on the front line, they are paying by far the highest price, but NATO allies and other countries all over the world are helping them, supporting them, including with military support.
But what do you say to those who believe that NATO, in fact, should take a large part of responsibility, of the blame, in letting the situation get to what it is today, in pursuing the alliance's provocative, many people would argue, so-called open door policy, bringing in more and more countries from Eastern Europe? The Russians have had it as a red line for a long time, preceding President Putin. You call this his war, but we know it has been well documented. Senior US officials and others have said it, that the rationale in Russia has been, and in the Soviet Union preceding that, that Ukraine and Georgia joining NATO was a major issue, that it could lead to this major conflagration. And here we are today. Don't you take part of the blame? In fact, a large part of the blame.
No, not at all. And just the idea that it is provocative, that the sovereign nations do what they want, just demonstrates a kind of completely wrong worldview that reflects. I'm coming from a small country, Norway, bordering Russia. And when we joined the NATO back in 1949, Joseph Stalin and Russia, Soviet Union said that was a provocation. But I'm very glad that London, Paris, and Washington said, well, that's for Norway to decide. And we applied, and they accepted us. So this idea that big powers can decide what small neighbors can do, and if they do something they don't like, that's a provocation. You know, that's a world I don't want to live in.
But let's face it, this is the world we live in. Many see Ukraine as a pawn in a big power struggle between the United States and Russia, let's face it.
But the question
is it a wise policy to continue to pursue?
No, but you speak as if NATO is moving east. No, it is independent. Slovenia is one nation, Norway is another, Poland, the Baltic countries. They have, through democratic free decisions, made their own choices and chosen their own path. And I think it's extremely important that we respect those free democratic decisions. If you start to reintroduce some kind of right for big powers to decide what neighbors can do, then we're moving backwards. Then we're moving into a world where we don't have free sovereign nations. Russia has subscribed to again and again, from the Helsinki Final Act to the Paris Accord, many other documents, that every nation has the right to choose its own path, including what kind of security arrangements it wants to be part of. We respect Ukraine when they want to join, but we also, of course, respect Sweden and Finland when they decide not to join. Russia should respect free and independent decisions by free and independent nations. That's all about it.
But is it about respecting freedom and the sovereignty of nations? Because there is something called the Monroe Doctrine. Are you suggesting that the 200-year-old doctrine has ended, that the sphere of influence that the US said it also sort of has,
first of all, I don't think
doesn't exist anymore? Because let's imagine for a second that missiles were positioned, Russian or Chinese missiles were placed in Cuba or Mexico or Venezuela. What happens then?
Also, I'm not defending everything the United States have done throughout the 200 years. I have been going in the streets of Oslo protesting against some of these wars. But the fact that one nation does something wrong in their history doesn't, in a way, excuse severe mistakes by another. So the whole thinking again that you have to start with the basics. The basic is, does an independent sovereign nation has the right to choose its own path? Yes or no? If you start to question that, you move into a world which Russia now try to re-establish by using force. The Ukrainians are standing up against that. They deserve our support. We are supporting them, and it's really impressive to see the strength and the courage they are now demonstrating in the fight against this.
Briefly before I move on, Secretary General, briefly before I move on, what is the price of peace for you? As Secretary General of NATO, I know you don't hold all the decisions in your hand, but would you be willing to pay a small price by stating by suggesting that NATO should not expand eastward, of course. And many see the potential membership of Ukraine in NATO as a fig leaf, not more. Are you willing to state that NATO should not expand any further?
So first of all, it is for Ukraine to decide, and I respect their decision whenever it's, or whether it's to join or not to join. Second, what Russia has proposed in the legally binding draft agreement for NATO is that we should sign an agreement with them stopping any further enlargement of NATO. And I think it was very interesting to listen to, for instance, Sweden and Finland. They're not currently applying for membership, but they came very strongly out against that idea, because for them that was to limit their options in the future. So this goes beyond Ukraine. What Russia is asking for is actually a ban on any further enlargement of NATO. And again, it's not NATO moving east. It's actually those countries, again, Slovenia, the Baltic countries, Poland, who have chosen to join our family. And this has been a great success. It has helped to spread freedom and democracy across Europe for several decades.
But the Russians are being more specific here in the case of Ukraine. They're asking for Ukraine to abide to the principle of neutrality, just like Austria was forced to after World War II. Yeah. Would that be a good idea?
But you said it forced to. Do we want to live in a world where big powers force small countries to do what they don't want to do? I said, that's not the world we like to live in. So the whole idea that it's a provocation for Russia that Ukraine does what they want to do is to turn the world upside down and violate fundamental principles, which also Russia has subscribed to. So it is for Ukraine to decide whether they want to aspire for membership. And then it is, of course, for 30 NATO allies to decide whether Ukraine is ready for membership. And it has been clear for a long time that membership for Ukraine was not something that was imminent, not something that was relevant in the near future. But again, this is about the principle of respecting every nation's right to choose their own path.
If it is the only way to stop the war tomorrow, is it worth considering? Yes or no?
But again, this is for Ukraine to decide. I support Ukraine's right to decide their own path, and then, of course, for 30 allies to decide when Ukraine is ready. And several allies have made it clear that this is not something which is relevant or on the agenda for the near future.
All right. Thank you, Secretary General. Let me move on to Borut Pahor, President of Slovenia. Your government has taken a very strong stance, like so many others, obviously, against Russia, sending in some weapons to Ukraine, closing its airspace to Russian flights. The Prime Minister has said, quote, defending Ukraine is defending Europe. Your government went a little further than that, likening the situation in Europe in 1939 when Poland was attacked, arguing that if Hitler had been stripped at that point, Europe would not have had a 6-year war. Are those comparisons sound? Do you stand by them? And what do you think needs to happen next? Are you still calling for a no-fly zone?
Let me start by supporting fully what has just been said by Secretary General of NATO, Jens. I think NATO is lucky to have a Secretary General who is very strong, but at the same time very wise with his political experience, number one. Number two, Slovenia as an active part of EU and NATO is a part of collective response to what has just happened in Ukraine. It's awful. We fully condemned. That is why we are fully participating in what EU and NATO are deciding is right to do. You are asking me, ma'am, about the no-fly zone. So, as Jens has just said, I will repeat. I feel there is no legal ground for such an act. It would be politically bad to do. I think there is no reason for NATO to go in direct conflict with Russia. Russia is invading Ukraine. We are trying to help in different ways, but there is no reason whatsoever to directly confront Russia in Ukraine, since Ukraine is not a member of NATO. But at the same time, we are saying, and we are sending a strong message to Russia, do not try to do anything in regards to members, the countries which are members of NATO, because at that very moment there would be a direct response.
But you asked for a no-fly zone, didn't you? Are you concerned that it would actually drag NATO into a direct confrontation with Russia in open warfare? I mean, it's still somewhat limited, but this could lead to something much bigger if there was an enforced no-fly zone.
Here it is a diplomacy forum. I think what is needed at this very moment is to force Russia into a corner to accept political negotiation. I think was incredibly good yesterday to organize here a meeting between two foreign ministers. I did not expect a great deal out of it. It is a beginning, maybe, of peaceful resolution of the crisis. But what I would like to state at this very moment, what is needed now, it is a ceasefire. I think everybody should press for a ceasefire and then to inspire both countries to a political negotiation.
You say what is needed now is a ceasefire, yet Slovenia has been asking the EU to take, quote, quick and courageous decisions to admit Ukraine immediately, and the Ukrainians have made a request to be admitted into the EU in a fast-track motion. Poland and the Czech Republic did the same. Do you worry that President Putin could see this as further provocation, that it could inflame tensions even more? Besides, is Ukraine ready to join the EU?
Number one, to our initiative with Poland and others, we invited EU to speed the process of enlargement with Ukraine. I would like also see this speed of process with Western Balkans. Number two, I think it is important to listen what will be the final decision of Ukraine. If Ukraine will be in favor of neutrality, will be in favor of their decision. But it should be their sovereign decision. This is very important.
It's, of course, an emotive time, and countries like yours want to show as much solidarity as they can towards Ukraine, understandably. But is Ukraine in a position to be fast-tracked into membership in NATO when you consider its per capita GDP is far lower than many developing countries, when you consider it hasn't really met many of the criteria, and you've got 5 official candidates that have been waiting for EU membership for years? What message would that send to them?
Well, listen, I think it's sovereign right of Ukraine to, applying for a full membership within NATO and EU. And it's up to EU and NATO then to decide what to do with this application. I think as far as EU enlargement process, I'm very much in favor of a speed process, because the enlargement is becoming a geopolitical question number one. This goes for Ukraine, this goes for Georgia, Moldova, and this definitely goes for Western Balkans. I said it at Munich Security Conference that there is a imminent need for Bosnia to be as fast as possible invited to a full membership of EU to prevent peace and stability there. So let me say once again, ma'am, at this very moment, I know how difficult it is for our friends in Ukraine. I admire President Zelensky, his government, and the people of Ukraine. They are doing their best. We do try our best also in the best possible way, not to enlarge then the war itself. It is a time to, get to the ceasefire, to go to the political negotiation, but at the end of the day, should be up to Ukraine as a sovereign country to decide its foreign and security policy.
All right. Thank you, President Pahor. Mohamed Bazoum, you've been president of Niger since April 2021, following the country's first peaceful transfer of power since its independence in 1960. And obviously, the country you obviously head, Niger, like so many other countries in Africa, are far removed from this crisis in Ukraine, yet they are directly affected by the surging price of oil and gas, affected by the surging price in wheat and other basic commodities. Just like the conflict itself, the economic impact is having a devastating and rapid effect on so many countries, as far removed as they may be. How do you view the events unfolding in Ukraine today?
Comment est-ce que vous allez? Elle n'a pas fini de traduire. She did not finish, but ask me the question again, please.
So the question
I was following the translator, not you.
How do you see the events unfolding in Ukraine today, given the fact that your country is so far removed physically, geographically, from what is going on?
Oui, merci madame. Nous sommes tout aussi concernés par ce qui se passe en Ukraine que
Söylediklerim. Thank you so much, ma'am. We, of course, follow very closely what's going on in Ukraine right now. And just like the entire world, we are parts of the same family and we belong to the same place. Well, actually, I want to approach this as if this question was asked before this crisis emerged. When I found out that I was going to participate into this meeting, when I thought about what's the price of peace and cost of war, the Ukraine problem made us think more about this. Before the troubles emerged in Ukraine, we could approach this issue on a theoretical way, but now we see it practically, we see it tangibly. Not only Ukraine is under attack now, but the entire humanity, and we are confronted with an entire world war. It is a entirely different world war, and we are all the citizens of the same village, because when the price of wheat increases, of course a poor country like ours feel it the most. The increasing energy and oil prices had made a serious impact on our country, and when the fuel increases, then the food prices increase as well, and this impacts at all levels our lives. This is the price of war. And the European friends also mentioned the same discussion. We are in the 21st century, and since the 19th century, since the times of Renaissance, we have always believed that we have had many discourses philosophically that people would change and we would all respect each other. We talked about a different humanity. But apart from all of these, we experienced 2 world wars, and if you will remember afterwards, we had the Warsaw Pact and the emergence of Soviet republics after the collapse of Soviet Union, and he was a Western person as well, and multiple agreements were signed, and we said it's better than Fukushima. We thought it ended. that we would be getting rid of arms and nuclear weapons. Many people believe that everybody would be subject to the same rules and principles and regulations. Too many people were idealistically believing this, but look where we ended now. And actually, we couldn't achieve this. We couldn't bring it to fruition. And we're going backwards now. And back then, the liberal opinions, ideas, we are way behind of the liberal and free opinions of that time. We're going backwards with increasing terror, with different types of nationalism competing with each other, madam.
People in Africa, for African countries, obviously, that will be affected like the rest of us. How divided is Africa today? Because there was a recent statement of, quote unquote, extreme concern by all African Union members. But the criticism of Russia has been somewhat muted. In fact, if you look at the General Assembly vote that took place on March 2nd, 25 African countries declined to join the vote that denounced Russia's military offensive in Ukraine. 17 abstained, 7 didn't vote at all, 1, Eritrea, voted against it. We know that the continent has had long-standing relations with the USSR, now with Russia. Russia has been investing quite heavily in your continent. My question is, will Africa maintain its interest in dealing with Russia despite the sanctions, the Western sanctions that are being imposed on it as a result of its offensive in Ukraine?
L'Afrique, ce n'est pas un seul pays, vous l'avez dit, c'est des pays différents.
Africa is not one single country, as you have mentioned also in the United Nations General Session. I don't think or talk on behalf of entire Africa. Africa should be able to assess the dangers or consequences of this war, and they need to take into consideration the impacts of this on itself, because we're going to pay a very hefty price of this war. And as the furthest away continent from Africa, we're going to pay a heftier price.
Looking at the current situation, we see that Europe is living almost on the edge. China, Russia, the entire world. And in order to get together and discuss, I believe that we have a precious opportunity, because we are so close to a catastrophe. So we need diplomatic and political measures to avoid such a catastrophe. So here is my mindset. It's not that Russia is not right. I mean, let's be realistic. And let's remember the fact Ukraine has the right to be independent. And I voted in favor of them, but if we need to pull ourselves out of this situation, let's be realistic, let's understand the situation with all aspects, and let's understand how we got ourselves here. Because if we're talking about something evil, and just like at the end of the Warsaw Convention, just like Gorbachev never happened. I mean, we have to think of everything, because we are facing multiple threats. We see the rise of nationalism, like the tension between the West and Russia can happen between China or the States, or like with the West tomorrow. So Maybe we have already wasted many precious opportunities. We could have benefited from a lot of details back in the 50s and 60s, but we overlooked or disregarded them. So such incidents ended and brought an end to many opportunities, and this is where we are right now.
To both our guests as well here on the panel with final remarks, with a way forward. How do we get out of this mess? To you first, President Pajor. I'll end with you, Secretary General. How does Europe get itself out of this mess? What is needed urgently right now?
Let us do whatever it takes to inspire, in a way, both sides to continue to dialogue, to search for a political solution of the crisis, to end the war, to cease fire at the beginning, and then to help both sides to try to come to a position that this peace will be a lasting one. So I think there is a strong need for a help to Ukraine in all terms, but at the same time, there is also a strong need to inspiration that diplomacy could work if there would be enough political will. And let me tell you one thing. I do, as I said, admire a courage of President Zelensky and Ukrainian people. But at the same time, I do admire his wisdom and the wisdom of the government. There is a political will of Ukrainian side to politically negotiate with an aggressor, which is really unbelievable. And I wish Ukrainian side all the success.
Thank you, President Pajor. Secretary General Stoltenberg, you must be counting the days. You don't ask me the days for what? The days for when you step down as Secretary General of NATO at the end of September. You have had quite a bit on your plate. What is the way forward for you? I know there's a NATO Ministers' Defense meeting on the 16th of March. This has certainly breathed new life into NATO. What is the way forward?
The most immediate thing that could end this war is that, of course, for Russia just to stop attacking an innocent, peaceful country. For President Putin to stop the war, to withdraw its forces, and then to sit down in good faith and negotiate a political solution. As long as he doesn't do that, then we continue to put pressure on him through the economic sanctions and through the support to the Ukrainian armed forces and the brave Ukrainian people and the leadership. And a minimum should be to agree on humanitarian corridors to get people, civilians out, and medicine, food in. In the more broader perspective, for me, the main answer is that in uncertain times, in times with new threats and new security challenges, we need strong multilateral institutions like the UN, like the EU, or like NATO. NATO is the strongest and most successful alliance in history because we stand together. We are 1 billion people, 30 countries, and our core task is to protect and defend each other. And we do that by committing to our collective defense clause, which says that an attack on one ally will trigger a response from the whole alliance. And this idea of one for all for one, that is the best way to preserve peace. We are a defensive alliance. We are sending a message that we stand together, and by that we don't provoke a conflict, but we preserve peace and prevent the conflict. And in uncertain times, we need strong international institutions, and NATO is one of them.
We certainly do. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Secretary General of NATO Stoltenberg, President Pajor, President Bazoum, and our special guest as well, Prime Minister Denis Şayhan. And thank you all very much indeed for joining us. Thank you for the discussion and for helping us think about the price of peace and cost of war. Thank you all very much indeed.